So as the title says, Righting a Wrong, Challenges and Advances Within Ineffable Literature. So for the last couple of years, I'm in my first year of the Transformative Studies TSD PhD program. My MFA was at Naropa University within their Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics. I have been what I call a born medium and oracle in this lifetime, remembering my alternative abilities. And my MFA was the first epic in a 4-part series that I've been channeling with ethereal, ineffable beings for almost 10 years. So my MFA parlayed into research that I started doing from a literary standpoint. And that's what I'm going to be speaking about, the persons within literature that do not necessarily have a voice or are being considered within a large section of field, the parapsychology field, which has largely been where persons with alternative abilities have been being researched. So, but I did want to at least address that because I'm in a transformative studies program that's more transdisciplinary based off of our mission of transdisciplinary scholars. And leading edge issues, combining scholarship and creativity and self-inquiry, which this is where my self-inquiry is coming from as a person, a literary person specifically with alternative abilities. So what is ineffable literature? And this is an overview of what I'm going to be presenting. Melioristic nomenclature, still being in the scholarship closet predominantly, especially as literary persons with alternative abilities. Inter-transdisciplinary, approaching it from both of those perspectives, as well as inter-transtextuality, which is a literary process. And then I'll go into the transtextual terminologies, and then close it up with finding the meta amongst the mediums. And this is basically a presentation about how can my transdisciplinary research advance over 100 years of parapsychology scholarship. So to begin with, this presentation raises some of the challenges and advantages of an underexplored field of ineffable literature, which I'm classifying as literature produced by persons with alternative abilities, such as mediums and clairvoyants, focusing on inter-transdisciplinary meta-communications of mediums through literary approaches such as inter-transtextuality. My work helps advance understanding through terminology comparisons in this presentation. And it's important because I'm a logophile, but also because I work within language and linguistics and literature, that I address and identify my nomenclatures for things. So I do want to begin with by stating interdisciplinary, and the reason why I'm keeping inter as part of the terminology is because it analyzes and synthesizes and harmonizes links between disciplines, and this is an interdisciplinary conference. But also keeping into context transdisciplinarity. And this is incorporating, humanities and literature and transcending boundaries within those. So introduction, again, alternative abilities. It really has a profound potential to start opening up what is predominantly one area or field of research within psychology and parapsychology that is over, a century old. But again, I do want to address at the beginning the nomenclature that I'm using in this presentation and the lexicon. Since my phenomenological experience as a literary person with alternative abilities, or what I have coined as an omnidimensional author, is like, I'm hearkening it to other fields that have been reclaiming their identity through melioristic nomenclature. So melioristic, I love words, means the belief that we can make the world better with human efforts. And so I'm going to address some of this lexicon. Keywords and why I say alternative abilities instead of words that people might normally know, such as occult or esoteric, as well as saying omnidimensional instead of spiritual, noetic, ethereal, metaphysical, or consciousness. In the first place, distinguishing between old terminologies like occult and esoteric is important for my lived experience, because occult means not revealed or secret. And esoteric means limited to a small circle. And I do not find those definitions indicative of my being, nor of necessarily society anymore. If you look up, and I'm citing here a 2021 Psychic Services report done on IBIS World, employment is almost at 100,000 people within the US alone, and the market size is 2 billion. So, you know, there's a number of different ways that limited to a small circle and secret or not revealed are not terminologies that necessarily apply anymore to our persons or to our genres. Omnidimensional, and the reason why that is it's been evolving for me, but it feels so much more placed, and I'm seeing these etymologies in different industries like omniverse and such, it's, you know, being in or involving all directions and dimensions. And that is more indicative of my lived experience, receiving all sorts of different kinds of communications from all sorts of different kinds of beings, as well as being able to communicate and interact with them. And the reason why I choose that over, you know, words such as like noetic, is like noetic's meaning is of, related to, or based on the intellect. And there's a number of words, even consciousness, that are based more within the context of mind or head brain, and which I find is limiting, since my sensory systems, and I'll go into in a little bit, are much more engaged on all sorts of different dimensional levels, even outside of material sense. So restrictions of a head mental brain as a terminology for me don't apply. And we see this in the research as well. One of the prominent parapsychology research centers, Windbridge Research Institute, has done a number of studies on the phenomenology of mediums for a number of years. So it's branching out of, again, a head brain, you know, construct within its terminology. So, and I have citations if anybody wants to have all of my notes on the presentation, because it is an academic conference, right? So I do want to start with, you know, addressing some of the larger challenges from, you know, my lived experience coming into scholarship from many decades. First of all, an entire lifetime of remembering my alternative abilities, but also working with a number of indigenous and ancient wisdom keepers around such practices and different states of remembering and practices. So we do have a really large body of research coined through parapsychology, which, as we can see, was coined in 1889. And it started even before that. Parapsychology is the terminology umbrella that pretty much incorporates PSI, or cycle, which is where it started in the early to mid 19th century. And so for over 100 years of parapsychology research, they haven't really had distinctive data on literary persons with alternative abilities, even though I'll show that there are similar terminologies between authors, poets, and writers to their experience or their expression or translation of a process or an, receiving state, as the mediums that have been being studied and quoted in research about their non-literary person state or experience. So that's one of the first challenges that opening up into an interdisciplinary, a transdisciplinary approach is where I'm coming from, and really where I want to help bridge these divides between language and literature and this prominent field. And then the second challenge that I've been coming up against or seeing overwhelmingly is that the same research for over 100 years has not been expanding that scholarship from a literary approach, not using or applying literary techniques such as transtextuality to evaluate similar texts from literary persons and from the studies and the researchers in parapsychology. So, and that leads me to intertranstextuality. So right now, at least in this presentation, I'm looking at psychology or parapsychology, linguistics, and literature as this beyond discipline, interdisciplinary approach. And then transtextuality, I'm going to go into literary persons and their definitions and their terminologies and comparing them against and with mediums from scholarship studies within parapsychology. And there's a number of different aspects of transtextuality to consider in this literary process. The first being intertextuality, which usually is like quotations or plagiarism or allusion. Architecturality, which is the designation of a text as part of a genre. So even me addressing new genres such as an omnidimensional author or maybe an omnidimensional genre of writing, architecturality would come into that play with like my research and that context. And then hypo or hypertextuality, a lot of people know like hypertexts within computer sciences, and it's a relationship between a text and a preceding hypotext. And this is where like translations come in, persons with alternative abilities that receive information and visions and input from ineffable spaces and beings. How do we translate that? So this is another textuality that can be considered. And then metatextuality is relationship between a text and another text, whether it's clear and explicit or implicit and referenced or mentioned. And then paratextuality, we kind of go back to that etymology of para, because it refers to the messages all around a text. And so with paratext, within paratextuality, you see titles, prefaces, headings, but then when you can get into epitext, this is including channeling sessions and research findings. How are those things informing other subsequent channeling sessions or research findings between fields within a field? So there's a lot of different ways just within this one particular literary, approach to being able to compare what's already out there and what's already been being produced, which is on a literary standpoint, hundreds of years old. But I'll start with more modern people. So transtextuality terminologies. One of the first ones that, I'm going to talk about is Arthur Rimbaud, and he was a poet in the mid to late 19th century. And he had a number of letters and other writings to people called Lettres du Voyant, in which he describes processes that are very similar and related terminologies to what persons with alternative abilities or mediums are citing within parapsychology. He says that I quote, I say that one must be a seer, make oneself a visionary. And in his Lettre du Voyant, I'm butchering the French there, he says, quote, the poet makes himself a seer by a long, prodigious, and rational disorganization of all of the senses, which I connect with. There's a sense of selflessness in the ineffable spaces of being able to receive. And so when you compare his statement in that publication to a recent publication, Psi versus Survival, and mediums phenomenology, that was produced in 2009. One of the mediums in that publication states, quote, in mediumship readings, communication comes through in a variety of ways, and often it is a combination of methods that go beyond the normal senses. So you can see that literary person, Arthur Rimbaud poet, is speaking about the same processes as a modern medium within parapsychology studies. Another one, and this gets very interesting because the spiritual movement about 100 years ago produced a lot of study and literature around it because it was both socially becoming acceptable and growth, exponential growth within spirituality movement, as well as the study and the construct of parapsychology with the psychology field. So Jean Elizabeth Leckie is actually Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's wife, and she was a medium, and she's unfortunately still an uncited co-author of one of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's pieces, Phineas Speaks, which is all around his wife's medium sessions. And so one of his quotes is the medium, and this is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle speaking about his wife in a channeling state. He says the medium never completely lost consciousness, but her hold upon her own organism was slight. The eyes were tightly closed and never opened until the power had left her. And if you compare this against the same study, Psi versus Survival, the medium's phenomenology publication in 2009, one of the mediums quotes, I will see his name in my mind or in front of me in the air or with my eyes closed. So again, we're having different, mediums speaking similar terminologies and definitions between, different disciplines. And another one is Georgiana Hyde Lees, or Georgie. And she was the author of she was the wife of W.B. Yeats. And she was also an uncited co-author of A Vision, of W.B. Yeats' A Vision, which has extensive notes about the channeling sessions that they did for years and that Georgie, channeled. And it's fascinating to read through just the amount of depth that was put into it, not just from a scholarly, perspective, but the amount of sessions that she held to receive information. And so one of the quotes in there from the being, that Phineas that she was channeling, is, quote, yes, there is a clearing of memory at end of each incarnation. So they're at this point, they were talking about death and incarnation and such. And if I compared that against a recent publication in 2020, a qualitative exploratory analysis of channel content, one of the mediums within that parapsychology study says, you choose to have a physical existence. And this is a voice that's being channeled through this medium as well. You choose to have a physical existence, and one of the parameters is that you must forget your source in order for the existence to have meaning. So they're talking about similar concepts around, losing or wiping or forgetting memories in incarnations, or, upon death and re-entry. And then the final literary person that I want to bring up is one of the strongest as an omnidimensional author, and her name was Hannah Weiner. And even though at the time in the 60s and 70s, she was described, schizophrenic pathology, she really stepped into like her knowing and her authenticity of being a person with alternative abilities, and especially as a literary translator and person of those processes. And she actually, titled her publications like Clairvoyant Journal 1974. It was a series of channeling sessions that she did. Again, it's just brilliant to read through. But one of the quotes from that publication is, "At Phil's concert, concentrating, eyes closed, felt a presence, astral, over whose shoulder, compliments, save a page, complete, saw, dark green, astral, image, too late. Please count, lean over and count, whisper, time. Don't understand timing, that's all." And if I compare this again to the Phenomenological Mediums publication from 2009, one of the mediums there is quoted as saying, "I may hear someone speaking right in my ear, calling my name, or just in my mind." So the processes, are there, the similar experiences are there between both these types of persons with alternative abilities or mediums. So yeah, there's challenges in this area, but there's also a lot of opportunities and a lot of things that are starting to take place, which make me incredibly hopeful and very grateful for being in this position of scholarship right now and being able to see, what's transpired and what's out there now, and where I can feel, the future of things is starting to take place. One of them is within religion and spirituality and raising ancient and indigenous teachings to the forefront, which is for me incredibly important, because the indigenous and ancient teachings and teachers and gurus and masters have been predominantly who have been helping me in my various states of practice and memory. And now I, have my own apprentices and have started to transition into that. And so it's very important to keep that honoring. And one of the ways that this is starting to show up is I'm hoping to be able to present at this upcoming conference. It's from the Harvard Divinity School and their program for the evolution of spirituality. And it's titled Uses and Abuses of Power in Alternative Spiritualities. So, just to even have an entire conference where you're bringing up the concept of what is so important to people with alternative abilities that isn't in mainstream education or scholarship. It's largely been just contained within one field in parapsychology. It's good to see that. Another way that I'm seeing this movement is what I've been referencing, the phenomenology and first-person perspectives of persons with alternative abilities that's been coming up in scholarship, instead of having, a more pre-modernistic approach of third-person investigation and, not a personal identity in the process or the research or the study. But more of that is coming out. When Brid Research Center did a number of studies on phenomenology, and the Institute of Noetic Sciences has been producing publications around this as well. So, and I think I'm even with a late start at time. So that's what I have today. Thank you for listening.